Let's look at creating some basic queries in Access. And a query is something that can perform operations and calculations with data that's stored in your tables. So first off, we could build a query based on any of these tables. And if I go to the Create tab up here, one of the easiest ways to make a query would just be to run the query wizard. In which case I could say, alright, simple query wizard, we'll try this one first. And then, since vendors was highlighted, it's going to build it on the vendors table, but I could choose other tables if I wanted. And we could add fields in there, so I'll just quickly add all of the fields into this first query. I'll click Next, and what title do you want for your query? We'll call it the vendors query. I could choose to take it into design view, but first let's just click Finish and open the query here. And so when I run the query, nothing really special there. Alright, let's get rid of that. And now let's create a query in design view. Okay, so I'm going to click on Query Design. And when I do this, notice that I could choose any of the tables that I want to add. And also if I hold down Control, I can choose multiple tables while I'm holding down Control. And if you click a table and hold down Shift, you can select all the tables in between it. There's a couple of shortcuts there. But in this first example, let's say we're going to do something with a payroll type. So I'll click on Add and then Close. So here's my table up here. And then down here I could select individual fields from this table, and if I wanted to add other tables, I could right click on the background, I could click on Show Table, and I could add, say, the employees table just as well. I could add that in. Okay, and then I could select the table, payroll type, employees, and then once I do that, I can pull down fields. So salary pay, or from employees, I could pull down first name or something like that. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and remove the employees table, and we'll build our first query, our practice query, on just one table. And the first thing I want to do is pull down the primary key, employee ID. And the next thing I'm going to pull down is the Boolean, whether or not they're salaried. And then I'm going to pull down their hourly pay. And let's say that we were going to give people raises across the board. We could create a calculated field in our query, and to do that, the field name would go before a single colon. So we call it new hourly rate, and then let's say I wanted to give them a raise. Maybe I was feeling really generous or had a really good year. Let's say we were going to give people a 25% raise all the way across the board. And so the way to do that would be to take their current rate of pay, and that always goes in square brackets. So I'd say hourly pay inside of square brackets. And notice what I'm matching. It's hourly pay here, so this is what I have to put inside my square brackets. And then I'd simply multiply using the asterisk times, and do 1.25. So 25%. 25% raise there. Alright, and then notice the options here. You can also choose whether to show or not to show. So if I uncheck this, this won't be showed. If I uncheck this, this won't be showed. Well, in this case, yes, I do want to show that. Salaried, we don't really need to show that. And then the next thing is the criteria in the query. So in any of these columns, I can apply rules or criteria for whether or not I want that calculation to apply, or whether or not I want to display a certain set of records or data. So in this case, since this is Boolean, it's either going to be yes or no. And we're only interested in doing this for the hourly employees. If they're salaried, we don't want to perform the calculation. Only if they're hourly. Okay. So with all of this information put in, the easiest way to save the query, just click on the X over here. Do you want to save the changes? Say yes. And I'll just call it query. and we'll call it new hourly rate projection. Okay. This will give us an idea if we apply the raise, what the hourly rates are going to be for various employees. Okay, and again, if I wanted to change something in Design View, I could right-click on the query and go to Design View. Also up here, if I come over here, notice I can click on different views here. Design View, SQL View. Notice that this, if I click on SQL View, these are the SQL statements. So I'm saying select, from the table payroll type, and then the field employee ID, hourly pay, and then calculate this field from the table, and then where payroll type salaried is equal to no. That's kind of a cool feature. It's all structured query language or SQL, but that way you can actually kind of see the code of what you're querying in the database. Alright, so anyway, to run the query, after showing you all the options, I'm just going to double click it. When I do double click it, notice their hourly pay here. So 125 and 45. The only thing is that this is formatted in currency, and in our query we didn't format the new field in currency. So to do that, to make it look proper the way that it should, I want to go back to Design View, and if I come over here and I right click up at the top here, pull this out, right click up at this top bar here, and then I can select properties. When I do, notice over here under formatting, I can select different data types. I'm going to select the currency data type, and that'll change to formatting, and it'll pad the values with double zeros if there are no cents, and if they're dollars and cents, fine, it'll use the dollar symbol. So I'm going to save my changes, and then yes, I want to save changes. And now I'm going to run the query again. Now notice the formatting. So my 25% raise across the board. I was making $100 an hour, now I'm making $125 an hour. I was making $25 an hour, now I'm making $31.25, or $45, and now I'm making $56.25. So just to give you an idea of a simple calculated field type query. The join operation will relate two or more tables together that have a relationship between their fields or values. So let's go ahead and create another query this time, and this time we'll include or set up a relationship with the join operation between fields and different tables. So again, it doesn't really matter what's highlighted, but I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to create a query in Design View, and I'm going to bring in two tables this time. So we'll bring in employees, and we'll bring in payroll type. Alright, so I'll hold down Control, select both of them. Now I have these two tables. So in order to perform a join operation, I would just highlight a field in one table and drag my mouse to the field I want to join it to in the other table. And now they do need to have a distinct relationship. In other words, in this case, every employee that I have in the employees table I want to also include in the payroll type table. So that would be a good type of join operation or relationship to set up. If I right click, I can delete the relationship. What I would not want to do is take employee ID and relate it to something like this. There's not a direct relationship between salary pay and employee ID. That wouldn't be a good join. So in this case, between the primary keys of both tables, they have matching keys. That would be a good join. Okay, so with that set up, the join operation performed and the relationship defined, I'm going to throw in some information here. So I'm going to do last name and first name, and that's going to be from the employees tables. Last name and first name. And actually I'm going to do ID first. I'll tell you what, we'll do employee ID, let's do last name, and then let's do first name. Alright, so employee ID, last name, first name. Let me move these over just a little bit. And let's do whether or not they are a United States citizen. So from the employees table, are they a U.S. citizen? let's do date hired. And then now let's add some wage data here. So under payroll type, to figure out what payroll type they are, let's see whether or not they are salaried. And also under payroll type, let's display their hourly wage. Okay, so are they salaried? They are, then they don't have an hourly wage. And then if they're not, they have an hourly wage, we'll display that. So these are all the items that we would want to display. Now we just need to add some criteria in. So obviously, if they're paid hourly, then the answer to salaried should be no. So we'll throw that in. And then also, let's say that we are going to change this and define it to just U.S. citizens. So we'll say yes and no there. So we defined our criteria for showing the records, and we pulled everything in, and we set up a relationship by joining these two primary key fields together. And we're going to save it. So we'll call our query, let's see, what do we call our query? Wage data for hourly U.S. citizens. Alright, I'll produce a query for our hourly U.S. citizens. Okay, and again, if I right click and go to design view, here's everything as it would look in design view. To run the query, I'm going to double click it, and then this would show our employees. So in this case, last name, employee ID, first name, U.S. citizen, date hired, salaried, and hourly pay. And to see if that matches our table, if we look over here, then the only employee who is both a U.S. citizen and, let me pull these fields down some. In this case, I'm a U.S. citizen. Now, other U.S. citizens are 002, 003, 007, and 008. But let's go look at 02, 03, 07, and 008. But let's look and see whether or not they happen to be salaried. Right, 02 and 03 are salaried, and 07 and 08 are also salaried. So they're not hourly. So in this case, we could see that our criteria is being applied the way it should be, because although these are U.S. citizens, they're salaried, so they wouldn't show up in hourly pay. Now let's say that we were to pull some of that criteria out. So I'm just going to copy this query, and I'll say query hourly data for, or we'll say wage data for hourly employees. Right. And this will just be everybody. So in design view, what I want to do is remove the criteria that they have to be a U.S. citizen. In this case, it's just going to be that they're not salaried, that they would appear. And then if I run the query, now notice my hourly employees appear. Okay, and I'm the only U.S. citizen. So, but Smith and Johnson, they're also hourly employees, and it shows their hourly pay. Now let's do an example where we'll join 3 tables instead of just 2, and we'll compute the hourly earnings. We're bi-weekly, so for the second week, we'll compute hourly earnings for our employees. So again, I want to make a query. I'm going to go click on the Create tab and open a query in Design View, and this time we're going to add 3 tables. So we're going to do employee, and we're going to do payroll type, and we're going to do biweekly hourly earnings. We'll add all that information in. Alright, and so now with these tables, I've got to join, or set up my relationships. And so in this case, employee ID relates to employee ID, and then also employee ID here would relate to employee ID and payroll type. All of these have a relationship, but in addition, I also want to make sure that, in this case, employee ID here is related to the primary key or employee ID under payroll type. I'll pull this down so you can see, but notice that there's a reciprocal relationship, and all tables are related on that one particular key. So employee ID. Now, we talked about normalization. Remember, we said that compound primary keys are not good, but in this example, we're still using a compound primary key, so these relate to this portion of the key, but not the complete or total key in this example. All right, but there's that join operation that would define our relationships between those tables. So let's go ahead and add some columns or some fields in. And the first thing I'm going to do is from the employees table, we're going to add employee ID. And let's kind of pull those out a little bit, and we're going to add last name. And pull that out a little bit, and we're going to add first name. And pull that out a little bit. Alright, so employee ID and last name and first name. Employee ID, last name, first name. What else are we gonna add here? Let's do whether or not they happen to be salaried, and that would be under payroll type. And if so, we'll also throw in their salary pay. Alright, and then let's throw in the week that they have worked. That would be from payroll bi-weekly. We'll throw in the week number. And let me just kind of size these up a little bit. It's just Boolean yes and no, so we don't have to give that a lot of space. Alright, so salary pay week. So employee ID, last name, first name, salary pay week number, and the last one we'll do as a calculated field. And their total pay is going to be let me add one more here. Salary pay, and we'll add, tell you what, let me do hourly pay too. If those fields apply, we'll throw those in there. And then here we'll go ahead and add it's going to add the week. And then once we add the week, we'll add a calculated field, and we'll just call this weekly pay, be the name of the field, and it's going to be their hourly pay. Alright, so this field up here, hourly pay. Let me pull this out some so you can see. Hourly pay times, and we'll multiply it by the hours that they have worked. Alright, so hours that they have worked. Okay, and then we can specify a week here. So in the criteria, we'll say the second week, and then we only want to display, in this case, if we're computing hourly data, we don't want to display salaried employees here. We may end up, reworking this query, or maybe just creating a separate query for salaried employees. So for now, let's make it only hourly employees. So the criteria for salary would be no. Remember, that's Boolean, and only on week 2. So weekly pay we'll just call this, let's call this week 2 pay. Alright, so let's go ahead and save it. And we'll call it query. And week 2 hourly pay. And run the query. We want it to give us the week 2 hourly pay. So let's go ahead and run the query. And then this will tell us what we have. Woo, whopping. In this case, hourly pay, the week it's for, and then the week 2 pay. You know, calculated based on their hourly pay. And why don't we, I'm going to go ahead and open this in design view. And why don't we add, let's see, that's our hourly pay. Why don't we add how many hours they worked for that week from payroll by weekly earnings. So to do that, move this over here, and let's move this here, and let's go ahead and specify hours here. And then I'll show the hours that they work as well. So the week and the hours and the hourly pay and all that good stuff. Alright, and it was formatted but as currency, but you know, just to make sure, if you weren't sure, you want to go ahead and specify currency as the formatting for that field. And we'll save the changes. Let's run the query again. Alright, and then there's our changes. Alright, and then in this case, week 1, week 2, week 1, week 2, week 1, week 2, we've got all of these criteria here. We're going to make that our week 2 hourly pay. So we want to go ahead and specify here under week equals 2 under our criteria. Alright, so now here's our week 2 pay, formatted in currency, and the hours that were worked, and the hourly pay, and so forth. And now we haven't accounted for overtime here, so in this case, you know, if 40 hours is a standard work week, and then we've got 55, so that would be 15 hours of overtime there. But that would be a separate calculation. We have to throw some time and a half in there and figure out, you know, what the overtime was. The next kind of query we're going to perform is called a totals query. Whereas all of the other queries we've dealt with, we specify criteria and fields, and they've been on individual records. But what's different about a totals query is that it can do operations on more than one record in a table. And some of your options are sum, count, average, minimum, variance, standard deviation, and where. And there's sort of a sideways little M symbol that you'll click on for total. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll set up a totals query. So I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to click on Query Design to create a query in Design View. And for the first example, let's say we just want to count the number of employees that we have. So it would be a very simple query based on one table. We'll add that in there and throw it in. So here are the number of employees that we have. Now there's no field here for any of those operations. You know, we mentioned sum, count, average, and so in order to add that, you know, that row there, that field, we need to go ahead and click on this button over here. See where it says totals? I'm kind of moving the mouse around, so I'm going to click that. And when I do, now I have the option to make this a totals query. Notice that this row appeared here. Wasn't there before, but now it says total. And if I were to pull down the drop-down list, look at all the operations. Group by is the default, but there's sum, an average, minimum, maximum, count, standard deviation, first, last, where. There's, you know, lots of different options there. But basically the only one that we're particularly particularly interested in is count. We just want to count up the number of employees that we have. So we'll select that. Of course, the table, only one here, employees, and we can base it on any value that we want. I'm just going to count the employee IDs because for every employee there's a unique identifier, a primary key called an employee ID. So if I can count the number of records I have based on the employee ID field, then I can figure out how many employees I have. Okay, and then you can also sort in ascending or descending order. It doesn't really apply here, but you know, those are other operations that we'll also use in the near future. Alright, so whereas the default might be group by, in this case I want to specify count, and I want to show the field. And the only other thing is, by default, I'm going to go ahead and run this and show you what it would look like. But by default, it's just going to add count of to whatever the field data is. So it'll just concatenate it. It's two strings, so it'll just say count of employee underscore ID all together. So I'm going to save changes. I'm going to call this query total employee count operation. Alright, so total employee count, and if I were to run it, notice it counts up my employees. And let me pull this out here so you can see it. See how it just concatenated count of to the field data, or to the to the field name there, employee ID. And if I were to open up my employee table, notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's accurate. The count's good. If I didn't like that, I could open this in design view, and I could come over here and I could specify a more elaborate name if I wanted to. Total number of Acme employees are, let's say, current total number of Acme employees. Let's say as Acme grows, we might want to do a head count of our employees. So current total number of Acme employees, and then this is what I want to call the field, so it would just basically change it to that string value. And this is the actual field name here, which has to match the data up here in my employee table. So let's save that, and then we'll run it. And I'll pull this out here. And notice now it's it's a bit more elaborate or user-friendly with spaces. So current total number of Acme employees and 7. As another example, let's say we'd like to figure out the standard average rate that we pay our hourly employees. Again, I'm going to make a new query. I'll click on the Create tab, open a query in Design View, and this time the information that I need is going to come from payroll type, just one table. But it's a totals operation, so I have to go over here and click on the button, the symbol for totals. That'll add the row down here for total. And really, I'm only concerned with two fields. The very first field is I don't want to perform this calculation if it's if they're not salaried. So I could specify. I could either specify both salaried and hourly, or I could specify criteria to only show records if they happen to be hourly. Either one. We'll play with both of those options just to show you what they look like. So we'll put salaried in there. And then I want to basically calculate their wage rate. So again, payroll type and their hourly pay. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and average. So the operation I'm going to specify under totals is going to be average. And it'll just simply say, like, whereas before it concatenated the string count of to the variable, it would say average of, and then hourly pay. And if I didn't want to do that, I have to match the field name here with this here, but I could, I could basically average hourly rate or something like that. We could rename the field dynamically that way. All right, so that's what it would look like there. All right, and then so for the first time around the query, I won't specify any criteria for salary, so it'll just kind of show an empty field. But then we'll specify criteria, and we'll see the difference. What the difference looks like between those. So let me go ahead and save this, and I'm going to call this one query, and it too is a total query, so I'm going to call it total hourly average. And let's run the query. Alright, and so when I run the query, here's my average hourly pay. I'll pull the field data out. Here's my average hourly rate here. Alright. So $56.60, maybe rounded off 67 cents. But notice we have an empty field here because salaried employees don't receive hourly pay. Okay. So we'll save the changes there. Now let's open this in design view. And let's put, we'll specify some criteria. Boolean if salaried, no, if they're not salaried. And now let's run it again, and now notice there's only one row. And this is, so my average hourly rate is $56.67 per hour. And if you correlate that to the table, let's look at payroll type. And here's my wage data. So yeah, if you were to add 125 and 45 together, you'd get about 56. That would be your average. Let's say we wanted to perform the same average with salaried employees. We could do something very similar. In this case, I'm just going to copy the query. Be the quickest way to create this new query. Paste, and we'll call it instead of query total hourly average, we'll call it query total salaried average. Okay. And let me open this in design view. I'll right click, go to design view. This time I only want to display it if salaried is yes, and you know, the hourly rate is meaningless for salaried employees. So what we're going to do is instead we'll say average salary pay, and the field we want to display will be this field up here, salary pay, not hourly pay. So I'm going to change that, salary pay. So average salary pay, and then that'll be from payroll type, and that'll be average. Okay. So, you know, we could have made it from scratch, but sometimes if you have a query that's very similar to another query that you've done previously, a quicker way to create it is just to right click, copy and paste, and use that previous query as a template for the next one. And you can create a query in no time at all. And so let's go ahead and save our changes. And so now we have a total hourly average and a total salaried average. And if we want our hourly average, again, there's our standard, you know, after we average up all the hourly rates, average is about $56.67 per hour, and our salaried average is about $2,550 on a bi-weekly basis. We pay our employees on a bi-weekly basis. So two different queries are using the totals operation on multiple records and averaging the values of those records together. Up until now, every query we've created has been built or based upon a table or multiple tables, but that doesn't have to be so. You can create what are called compound queries. Compound queries are queries that are based on more than one query, or a combination of queries and tables. So to do that, I'm going to click on the Create tab, and I'm going to go and create a new query in Design View. And up until now, everything we've done has been on this tab, the Tables tab. But now I'm going to switch over to the Queries tab, and I'm going to build this query based upon another query, a previous query. And so that every time we run this query in a compound query, it'll run any queries that are a part of it first to obtain the results. So in this case, the results I want are the total hourly average based on that query. So I'll add that query in, and we'll drag this down. And let's just use a calculated field from that query. So that this is a totals query in and of itself. So I don't have to make this query a totals query because it's compound, and when I run this query, it'll turn around and call this query, and that'll perform the totals operation. Actually averaging the hourly rate together. So that's already done, saved, and in that query, so I don't have to redo that. So this query itself is not going to be totals, but we will use a calculated field value. And let's just specify salaried so that and we won't even make that visible, but let's say that, in this case, no. That'll be our criteria that we don't, we want to be displayed there. Alright, salaried, and then let's go in and we're going to call this the current average hourly rate. All right. Average hourly rate is the field there, but let's rename it. Current average hourly rate. Remember that we can rename it if we type it before a colon. Ooh, that's a long name, eh? Alright, so then back that up a little bit. So current average hourly rate, this will be what it appears as, but this will be the actual result it obtains after running the first query and the totals operation, an average. And then let's say we were going to, we're going to give everybody a 25% raise. So we'll call this one future, or yeah, future average hourly rate. That'll be the name of the field, and then we have to supply the calculation for it. So future average hourly rate, and the calculation, we just want to pull in the average hourly rate. And not case sensitive, but I like to be, I'm used to working with Java and C++, which are case sensitive languages, so I like to stay in that case sensitive zone so I don't get out of it. But anyway, alright, so average hourly rate times, and then remember we're going to give everyone a 25% raise there, so times 1.25. We'll do that. Alright, and I'm just going to go ahead and save this query. You want to save it? Yes, and we will call this query and compound and future, let's see, future hourly average, compound query future hourly average, that's what we'll call it. Alright, so then if we run it, now let's run it. So I'm just going to go over into query compound future hourly average and click on it. And the current average is 56. Pull this out here. 56, 57. The only thing is we want to format that for currency. So I'm going to go back and do that. Right click, design view. And let's do this here, properties, and we'll just format it for currency. Alright. And now we'll run that query. So this is their current average. And then over here, this will be their projected, be their projected new average once we give them a 25% raise. Give us an idea of how much it would cost our company to give that kind of a raise. Next, let's take a look at using the the date function in queries. And the date function is kind of cool because it'll pretty much take care of doing the math for you, of figuring out things like the differences between dates, or allowing you to do all kinds of really cool calculations quite easily using the date, without having to get bogged down into the math of it. So we're going to make another query now. I'm going to go click on Create on the Create tab and make a query in Design View. And this time I'm just going to add one table, employees. And let's say that we wanted to give, maybe it's our 10th year anniversary at Acme, and we're going to give employees a $5 bonus for every day they've been with the company. Okay? And so some of the fields we might select employee ID, and I'm going to do last name and first name. Alright, Alright, so employee ID, last name, first name. And let's see, we'll do just a calculated field. And tenth year anniversary bonus is what we'll call it. We pull this table over here. 10th year anniversary bonus, and we're going to basically base this on we'll use the date object, and we'll subtract the date hired from the date. That'll take care of doing the math. So now remember that you have a mathematical precedence in programming, just like you do in mathematics. So like addition and subtraction bind, they don't bind as tightly as like multiplication and division. So you have to be careful of the order that you do operations and when you're specifying an expression. But you can change that with a parenthetical expression or parentheses, so you can alter the normal default precedence. All right. So one of the things that we would do is that we want to basically multiply we want to figure out the exact number of days that they've been. Oops, went too far there. So I want to figure this out first before I multiply it by, we're going to give them a $5 bonus for every day. So to do that, I would use the date function. And then once I specify the date function, I'm going to subtract date hired. All right, and that's this field value up here. So it says date hired. And here's where I need the parentheses. So in a parenthetical expression, I want to change the precedence order. I want to make sure that I do this first before I do an operation that binds tighter in mathematical precedence, which in this case is going to be multiplication. We'll give them $5 for their bonus. And then the only other thing I want to do is let's format this field, right click properties and make it currency. So we'll do that as well. Okay. And this is irregardless of whether or not the employee is salaried or hourly. It's just based on how long they've been with the company. Okay, and so if I were to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to say yes, I want to save it. I'm going to say query date dependent bonus for 10th anniversary. All right, and then if I were to run that query, pull this field data out here, and there you can. All right, so now I can see based on the number of days that they've been with the company, what their bonus would be. Now let's say I want to go back and I'm going to open this up in design view, and I'm going to also, let's say that I want to specify, before I do this, let's say that I want to specify the number of days that they've been with the company. And I could basically take that same calculation right there and plug it in over here. And so I'm just going to say days with company, and it's just going to be date minus date hired. And I don't need any parentheses here. I don't have to alter precedence order because I'm not performing an operation that binds tighter, no multiplication. So just a subtraction, we're okay there. So days with company, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And run the query. And now we can see. We'll pull this out a little bit. So you can see that the relationship between the days they've been employed and the bonus they get in the 10th year anniversary. Now, Acme's a company that rewards loyalty. We can also figure out things like hours and minutes on the date object itself, just specifying that. So let's create a new table. And I'm going to just create a table in design view, cut to the chase, so to speak. And let's do our standard primary key of employee ID. And I'm going to specify that as the primary key. And then the next thing I'm interested in is going to be N. And I'm going to specify that as a date time. And notice if I come down here to formatting, there's different formats. There's long time, short time, medium time. I'm going to choose medium time. I don't want the seconds, but I do want to specify AM or PM. So I'll choose that option. And then I'm going to do out. Same thing, date time. Specify the formatting to medium time. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is the date that they worked on. And that's a key name field, so remember we want to avoid that date object. So instead of date, I'm going to put let's see, date. We'll just call it date worked. And I want to specify here that it's a date time object. And this time for the formatting, I'm going to specify a long date. So long date here, you know, you can see the formatting there. Okay, so we've created our table in Design View, and yes, let's save the changes, and we'll just call this time clock. Alright, so there's time clock, and let me go ahead and open time clock. And we would want to put our employee data in there, right? So let me remember, hang on, let me remember what our, alright, so 001 through 008, skipping to 006 there. Alright, so time clock, 001, and let's say that, you know, we come in at 7 AM, and we're out at 5 PM, and the date that we worked, let's see, what was the date? 08/01/2011. We'll do that. Alright, let me pull that out. Long enough for the, notice how it masks the field until I give it enough space to actually display the date there. Monday, alright, so there we go. Alright, so next one, 002. And if I hold down Control and hit the apostrophe, I can just copy that data. And so I'm going to do that. And then 003. Let's say 003 came in at 8:35 AM and left at 4:45 PM. And let's do 08/02. We'll do all these for the same date here. Let's be the same date. Alright, so 003, 004 came in at, let's say, 9:12 AM. We'll make it irregular and left at 3:53 PM. And then 005 came in at 6:05 AM and left at 5:32 PM. And no 006, there's a 007. Let's say that they came in at 7:33 AM and they left at 5:02 PM. And finally, let's do 008. And 008 comes in at 8:05 AM and leaves at 4:12 PM. And we'll make it 4:44. Alright, so that'll give us some clock information for our time clock. Just we can use data from this table now. So with our new table, let's look at performing some additional calculations.